covering DEI, ESG, and SEL, and yeah, you all are correct. DEI stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion, ESG for environmental, social, and governance, and SEL for social emotional learning. And these are methods that DEI, for example, are methods in which these theories are applied into corporate life and to universities. ESG is how this is affecting our economic lives, and SEL is how it's affecting our children's education. And so this is basically how the theory is being propagated and enforced. I have this class title in my notes as Theory is Liturgy. As we long have been discussing, I make an argument that cultural Marxism, or Marxism in general, and the postmodernism that was later birthed from it is actually a modern manifestation of old esoteric religions. So this is, in essence, the way that this new woke religion is doing church in the modern era, and it is stretched out into all aspects of society. So what we're first going to be approaching is the DEI aspect, which is the diversity, equity, and inclusion. And in doing so, we're going to have to get, once again, going to definitions. We're going to be defining what diversity is, what equity is, and what inclusion is, so we can then criticize it. We're going to critique the critique, so to speak. And I have DEI titled as the ecclesiology of theory, where ecclesiology in religious terms means the study of the church, or how we do church. In Greek, it just means speech or discussion about congregations. But this is how we are being liturgized, meaning how the world is being expected to act morally, ethically in groups in the real world. And this is all being enforced through our workplaces and our schools. So in the modern era, I would argue that the university has become the modern cathedral, the replacement for what once was the cathedral, and then thus people are going out after being proselytized in these universities and going out and making disciples within workplaces. So that being said, I'm going to go ahead and get into the presentation. So I'm going to start here. So I did something this week that is I should have done this from the get-go. I'm underlining the words you want to pay attention to, where you have the hidden meanings within the theory. Okay, so this is diversity, the definition as you would have it through a standard diversity, equity, and inclusion office in any corporation or school. It's defined as the concept of diversity encompasses acceptance and respect. It means understanding that everyone is unique and recognizing our individual differences. These can be along the dimensions of race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, age, physical abilities, religious beliefs, political beliefs, or other ideologies. It is the explanations of these differences in a safe, positive, and nurturing environment. It is about understanding each other and moving beyond simple tolerance to embracing and celebrating the rich dimensions of diversity contained within each individual. So I underlined a number of different terms in this definition, as it were. Acceptance. So remember I told you how tolerance is no longer tolerance. It now means acceptance, and here they are being very open about it in their exploration of diversity. The exploration, that's why I've got that underlined, is because the whole concept of these theories is to get you to start critiquing everything that you know about the culture, the religion, anything that you were raised in, and that exploring is actually to apply the, I just went brain dead, the dialectic towards your way of knowing. And then I underline, it is about understanding each other and moving beyond simple tolerance to embracing and celebrating the rich dimensions of diversity contained within each individual. So it's no longer a thing of going to work or school and saying, hey, you do you and I'll do me. It's now enforced that I have to celebrate you, regardless of how my own, let's say, philosophical or religious or theological background is. And
they have to celebrate us also.
You know how this theory works. You are part of the hegemony, Miss Evelyn. Okay, so to continue, diversity is a reality, and this is a clue on the religious part, created by individuals and groups from a broad spectrum of demographic and philosophical differences. It is extremely important to support and protect diversity because by valuing individuals and groups free from prejudice, by fostering a climate where equity, which we know what that means, and we're going to get deep into the weeds on that meaning here soon, and mutual respect are intrinsic, we will create a success-oriented, cooperative, and caring community that draws intellectual strength and produces innovative solutions from the synergy of its people. I underline synergy because we're really going to get into that in the religious aspect of this, but this theory doesn't work until we're all working together on the same goal. So if you want to say this tends to mirror a lot of what you would consider like a post-millennial Christian viewpoint, and that this theory is working together, everybody working together towards realizing a utopia on earth.
But it's not mutual. There's mutual respect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, but yeah, exactly. You're starting to get the hypocrisy behind these definitions.
The synergy, everybody working together. So if it fails, it's our fault.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we didn't get on board with it.
That's exactly what you, like any time you'll talk to a modern day Marxist or a socialist, they say true socialism or Marxist communism has never worked before because it's X, Y, Z is the blame of it. And it's always somebody else's fault. Exactly. Okay, so to continue with their definition, diversity means more than just acknowledging and or tolerating differences. Diversity is a set of conscious practices that involve understanding and appreciating the interdependence of humanity, cultures, and the natural environment, practicing mutual respect for qualities and experiences that are different from our own, and understanding that diversity includes not only ways of being, but also ways of knowing. There's that standpoint epistemology we've talked about beforehand. Okay, we continue, recognizing that personal, cultural, and institutionalized discrimination creates and sustains privileges for some, while creating and sustaining disadvantages for others. There's your intersectionality. Building alliances across differences so we can work together to eradicate all forms of discrimination. Diversity includes, therefore, knowing how to relate to those qualities and conditions that are different from our own and outside the groups to which we belong, yet are present in other individuals and groups. And then, continuing to go on these include, but are not limited to, age, ethnicity, class, gender, physical abilities, qualities, race, and sexual orientation, as well as religious status, gender expression. I'm going to let you all read that list. Finally, we acknowledge that these categories of difference are not always fixed, but can be fluid. Okay, there's that breaking down of categories. We respect individual rights to self-identification, and we recognize that no one culture is intrinsically superior to one another. And there's that cultural relativism again. So this comes from Queensborough Community College, from their Office of Diversity. So this isn't something that I made up as to parody it. This is them speaking about themselves.
But if I identify as a female, that's not accepted.
Well, depends on, are we talking about, have you been oppressed by the patriarchy? Then you have a certain intersectional positionality that gives you some insight so that me, a male, would not have access to. Yeah, I'd like to say that, but unfortunately, if you've worked for a corporation, yeah, unless you already know you've got not a good retirement nest egg or a job lined up. In fact, that's one of the things we're going to talk about in one of the next few classes is how to confront these issues when you run into them. And you all may not be working in a position where you have to have this knowledge, but you probably know somebody. So I'll teach you all how to confront, let's say, forced diversity, equity, and inclusion training that most people are going to have to go through in modern office settings or just any corporate settings. Okay, so now I'm going to start critiquing. So defining terms, diversity, rending the woke curtain, trying to tear down the barriers of obfuscation that they like to try to put up to make us think that they're speaking of something that's actually of good moral virtue. So the first thing to notice about this definition of diversity is that it's oddly long and isn't likely to match the definition you've been carrying for the world. You're likely to think diversity means something about having different identities and points of view represented, yet this definition immediately asks us for more. First, and particularly, that differences be explored in a safe, positive, and nurturing environment. If you've heard the term safe spaces, that's where that comes from. Therefore, under the auspices of critical social justice, diversity mandates creating and maintaining such an environment, which in turn requires controlling it. As indicated, diversity includes knowing how to relate to others across demographic differences, which also will be controlled under theory. So not only controlling the environment, but controlling how we interact with each other. Diversity in the critical social justice usage, while occasionally claiming to be tolerant of differences of ideas and political viewpoints and nodding towards philosophical differences, focuses in reality almost entirely on physical and cultural differences, which it evaluates according to the critical social justice conceptions of privilege and marginalization. Okay. This may seem confusing, but it's because the theory of critical social justice takes the view that one's relationship to systemic power in society is productive of knowledge. That is, who you are demographically and how your group identifies relates to systemic power in society determines what you can know and how society values you as a potential knower. Hidden knowledge, anyone? Critical social justice theory posits that a person's way of knowing about anything is tied to their identity and its position in relationship to systemic power within society. Diversity in critical social justice usage, therefore, tends to mean uniformity of viewpoint about ideological matters. All diversity of viewpoint from the perspective of critical social justice's meaning of the term arises by providing different cultural knowledges, which are only considered authentic if they corroborate with the relationship of the identity group in question to systemic power as identified by theory. And all that means is it's only valued in that. Is it tied to a historically or currently marginalized group? So your way of knowing is only ever going to be valued. My way of knowing as a white man is going to be immediately devalued, and then I'll be asked to be quiet and listen to say the identity of a female person of color who may have come from a different socioeconomic background than I am. So, and this is something you'll run into in DEI meetings, or sometimes I like to call modern struggle sessions, that's what they are. But we'll get into that a little bit more in depth momentarily. So critical social justice requires authenticity because theory insists that various identity groups have identifiable relationships to systemic power that can only be comprehended, which is called lived experience, and that these lived experience in many ways define that identity group. This in turn follows because critical social justice sees systemic power and oppression by it as the only objective truths that there are about material reality. Bear with me one moment. Let's see if I can get the display back up and running. I am a klutz and I bumped the the HDMI cable here. Bear with me a moment, please. This one. Okay, that's in. There we go. Okay, thank you for your patience there. Where are we at? You're going to do this, aren't you? Okay, here we go. We're back. We're back in business. Okay, where are we at? 13? Okay, thank you. All right. Diversity depends on cultural relativism, the idea that no one culture is superior to another. The statement is not limited under critical social justice to generally arbitrary cultural mores like styles of dress, food, music, and so on, but also includes the belief that knowledge-producing and dispute-resolving methodologies are mere cultural relics that cannot be compared against one another, for one being superior to another. Under such a rubric, folklore, superstition, magic, and witchcraft are cultural artifacts that cannot be contradicted by others like science, reason, logic, and legal standards. So nobody has one objective way of knowing that's better than the other. So if we say we're interjected by trying to present an evidence-based case on, like, say, Christianity, and let's say a shaman from the deep Amazon contradicts us with, say, the way that they know the world, we would be asked then to either to be quiet and respectfully listen to this shaman, or we otherwise would be blamed for trying to push our hegemonic knowledge on the shaman.
And it will be quiet while he pushes his knowledge.
Yes, it's actually. I'm going to put up some videos of actual. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to put up some videos of actual corporate diversity and equity and inclusion trainings where people have actually been forced to be quiet and listen to the voices of the marginalized, and show you what actually happens when you do try to speak up in these affairs. I know Miranda, my wife, works for an organization that, let's say, has had a lot of these different trainings. She sat in, being that she's not a white male. I think she's been able to be kind of like a fly on the wall on most of these, and she can probably tell you that they've been rather, let's say, educational and entertaining. And if you find this theory to be, is applied to be kind of in a crazy way as it's applied. Okay, sorry to put you on the spot there, love. But yeah, she's told me all about it over dinner many times, and yeah. So anyways, to get back on track, so we were talking about the shaman. Okay, so now we're going into equity. Oh, good, we're making good time. So equity, this is the theory term, so their definition. The notion of being fair and impartial as an individual engages with an organization or system, particularly systems of grievance. Sorry, I put inflections in all the wrong syllables there. It reflects processes and practices that both acknowledge that we live in a world where everyone has not been afforded the same resources and treatment, while also working to remedy this fact. Equity is often conflated with the term equality, which means sameness, and assumes incorrectly that we all have had equal access, treatment, and outcomes. In fact, true equity implies that an individual may need to experience or receive something different, not equal, in order to maintain fairness and access. And that comes from Brandeis University's DEI portion. But you see the systems of grievance. Do you know what that means? That is another way of terming critical methodologies. So people who are being marginalized, people who would have grievances against, let's say, hegemonic groups. We're going to use that H word all the time. So it's just so much easier than saying it other ways. So that afforded the same resources and treatment. Do you know what another term for that is?
Privilege.
It's a C word. What could be an S word? Anybody? What? Communism or socialism. So, and now here, let's tear apart the woke definition. So equity. In critical social justice, the meaning of equity takes pains to distinguish itself from that of equality, where equality means that citizen A and citizen B are treated equally. Equity means adjusting shares in order to make citizens A and B equal. That's actually taken out of the Communist Manifesto there. In that sense, equity is something like a kind of social communism. If we will, the intentional redistribution of shares, but not necessarily along the lines of existing economic disparity, but in order to adjust for and correct current and historical injustices, both as they exist in reality and as have been drawn out by the various critical theories. So not just anything that has existed, but something that has been made to exist by the critical theories, and that's the grievance systems process in play. Because of the simplistic ideas of power and identity found within critical social justice worldviews, all imbalances of representation and desirable areas of work are held to be caused by these perceived power dynamics. Equity is the intended remedy for this problem, and it is made applicable only and especially to positions of status and influence. Our particular concerns, are of particular concern are positions that have influence where power is concerned, including in terms of shaping the discourse of society. That means changing how we talk about everything.
It is like socialism.
It is. It's not like, it is. No. Within critical social justice conceptions of the world, invisible systems of power and privilege are understood to hold some people back in often invisible ways because of their race, gender, sexuality, or other marginalized identity factors. Therefore, equity requires giving some identity groups privileges in order to redress the perceived imbalance. This is the difference between attempting to force equality of outcome by enforcing some resource allocation system, which is communism, and equality of opportunity. And mind you, what had happened during the Bolshevik revolutions in the Soviet Union and Mao's later civil war, but later cultural revolution, is you may not think the Soviet Union had multiple ethnicities, but they did. The core of the Russian identity really only extends out about, say, 300 miles circumference around Moscow, and the rest are all different ethnicities. So they basically started telling everybody that they were racist against all the other different nationalities, from, let's say, Turkic peoples, Siberian peoples, which are related to American Indians in some way, to the Baltic peoples, to the people who lives in the Caucasus Mountains. Everybody is now racist against everybody else, and then they played it against the core identity. And the same thing happened with Mao. He played all the different ethnicities within China, which we have, even when Tibet wasn't part of them. You still had different Turkic groups, different Chinese ethnicities, which there are more than just one, and other ethnicities that aren't even related to Chinese within that whole organization, and played them against each other. It's just an old divide and conquer method, but
In North Korea, they started it by your ancestors owned slaves and your ancestors didn't.
mm-hmm.
So even if you can't break it down, China is huge,
Mhm.
so you can break it down into Russia. But even in a smaller country, there's still easy ways to break things down.
Yeah, and the theory is good at being able to create new identities to be able to play against the larger group dynamic, which is what we're seeing hugely this day and age, with countless gender flags being invented nearly daily. But not to disparage the system, in a way I'm kind of straw manning it, but I would say it's the theory in action. It's like, if you don't, even if you have what would be considered mostly homogenous group, you'll always be able to pull at the threads in some way to be able to find some difference. And so that's the system in action. So in practice, an equity approach is almost wholly unconcerned with the root causes of differing outcomes and merely seeks to identify where they occur and then artificially correct them, perhaps through preferential hiring, grading, promotion, pay, etc., by eliminating measurements that reveal disparities like standardized testing, or even by installing quotas and specific guidelines for how outcomes must come out regardless of what leads to them. In that sense, it is a very impoverished theory that is unlikely to achieve any of its stated goals and will probably hurt most of those it claims to help. Let me get all my notes back up to where you all are, because I have some places I do have extra notes I do want to read. So, where equality would imply not being particularly concerned with the demography of people filling certain roles, equity is centrally concerned with this. It often calls for wanting to achieve parity with the existing demographics of the population, which would mean the most status-bearing professions would employ roughly 50% of women and whatever percentages of racial and sexual minorities are present in the prevailing population. This itself can be considered problematic, however, and often seeks overrepresentations by members of smaller minority or minoritized groups, such as trans identities. So one of the things I wanted to kind of talk about is, like, within this idea of equity, especially when it talks about representation, how many times do you hear about needing to have more female CEOs or executives, or people of color CEOs or executives, right? Or something of that nature, or somebody high up within a corporate or governmental structure. But you never hear it in the opposite. We need to have more women in the waste management community, more, women garbage men, or you can't even use that term anymore, garbage person. You never hear it in the opposite direction. It's, what's that?
Sanitation engineer.
Oh man, you get the woke star today, Joni. So yeah, you never hear it in that means, like, we don't have enough representation in female mechanics in transmission shops. Do we ever hear that on the news? So we don't have that, what do you call it? What would you call that? What ceiling would you call that? The jack ceiling? Nobody's busting that ceiling, huh?
Right. We don't want them.
All right. Moreover, equity, importantly, is often to be assessed historically, not merely in the present moment. If an identity group has historically been disenfranchised or excluded from a particular status-bearing role, equity often implies achieving representation numbers higher than demographic parity to make up for the historical injustice. It is also in this light that many arguments about reparations, whether material, monetary, or symbolic, such as through high-status employment, are situated. That is, equity is not merely about making up for injustices, but also often about making up for past injustices. So, I know I was making a bit of picking fun about the system with that last part, but it's interesting that it goes against like our call as Christians to be as humble and live sacrificially. Like, even if we are in these people would consider undesirable positions, that we would still be able to do our jobs and do all the work that we're trusted with grace and loving kindness and diligence, knowing that this is where God wants us. But here, everybody's always gunning to be up on top, so there's no humility built into the system. And then, so talking about making it for these past injustices, I had something, sorry, at the tip of my tongue there before I went into the first point, but hopefully I'll remember it later. So I want to get back into this. So equity is often sought under a combined suite of diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, and as such, these terms have become major buzzwords in most professional sectors, particularly education. Equity may not be enough because it's incrementalist in orientation, and therefore that overthrowing the system might be preferred. This is the underlying objective of the critical social justice approach. Social revolution, according to the terms of critical social justice theory, proposals like DEI are either fallback or compromise positions within the liberal systems, or half measures deemed better than nothing. So I kind of had a little thing where I clipped that slide, so it kind of didn't make a lot of sense, but I think I trimmed down something that was a little bit more expanded in that we're getting this everywhere, but it's being treated as if this is only the first step to get us where we really need to be, is what that really boils down to. So when equity programs do not meet their intended goals, the resistance, this is the excuses we were talking about, by privileged people is typically blamed. This resistance is often easy to find proof of because equity programs deliberately stack the deck in favor of certain identity groups and occasionally explicitly attempt to reduce the numbers of others. This is intrinsically unfair, if not a bad idea, that places some irrelevant characteristics like identity ahead of relevant characteristics like competence and hiring decisions. The Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Suite was introduced as a deliberate walk-around for affirmative action. So even if we're going to start seeing, like we just recently had that affirmative action suit up in the Supreme Court of Harvard's admissions practices, where they basically reversed Harvard's affirmative action program, especially as it was causing them to reject high-performing Asian students because of their overrepresentation within Harvard, even though they earn their places there due to merit. This is what Harvard snapped and put in a really comprehensive diversity, equity, and inclusion program in place of the affirmative action program that was just stricken as illegal. So within like a day, they had it ready to go. They were working on it as a backup plan in case the Supreme Court did not go their way, which it did not. But even if you're going to be running into issues where this new Supreme Court case is turning over affirmative action within your workplaces, you're going to see DEI step up and take its place. This is what I'm trying to state there. I probably should have just typed that out thinking.
Is that going to affect Texas schools also, the affirmative action thing?
Yeah, it should. It's I know Texas has some fairly conservative rules on affirmative action, but it's now going to be legal standard. So what typically happens whenever a Supreme Court decision is monumental, as that takes place, you basically have a lot of different nonprofit legal organizations that are ready to, with the lock and load with lawsuits. They just need somebody to step in and actually say, apply for a job that they know they're going to face like discrimination. Like say, if I just applied for a job and was rejected due to me being white, then I can just go approach one of these organizations and it would start up you have to be the scapegoat in order for that to happen. But is something like that going to probably start happening across the country? Yeah. Is it going to happen in Texas due to, like, say, the Fifth Court of Appeals, Fifth Circuit of Appeals, should I say? More than likely, yes. So, and my wife would be the one to ask about that more than me. So, sorry, I'm putting you all on the spotlight today, aren't I? Good thing you're not on camera. Nobody sees your red cheeks right now. All right. So I'm trying to push through these slides really quickly because there are 91 of them. So let me know if I'm going too quick, but I think we're hanging in there. So now we're into inclusion. So their definition of inclusion is the notion that an organization or system is welcoming to new populations and or identities. This new presence is not merely tolerated, but expected to contribute meaningfully into the system in a positive, mutually beneficial way. Inclusive processes and practices are ones that strive to bring groups together to make decisions in collaborative, mutual, and equitable ways. This once again is from Brandeis University. So we are, excuse me. So we see already we have the idea of identities, the identity groups that we're working with. Not merely tolerated, but expect to contribute meaningfully into a system in positive, mutually beneficial way. That is not quite the same as, let's say, affirming or acceptance, but it's, oh, excuse me. I don't remember what I was going to say about that. Let's just move on. I had a point. Believe me, I had a point on that one. I just forgot about it. So I was trying to buy some time there, and I can't remember. So, all right, let's move forward. All right, so, and then the critique of a definition. So inclusion in the general sense of the word means welcome everybody. That's what we typically would think it means. That is, to be inclusive is not to exclude anyone. That is, to be inclusive is not to exclude anyone. Inclusion in a critical social justice sense refers to something subtly different that extends that idea in a particular way. It means creating a welcoming environment specifically for groups considered marginalized. And this entails an exclusion of anything that can feel unwelcoming to any identity group. This is because everything in critical social justice must be understood in terms of systemic power dynamics that it theorizes, characterize all social interactions, if not material reality. Okay. Excuse me.
Anything that can feel unwelcome.
Mm-hmm.
So if they feel like white people are.
Oh, just you wait. And we're going to be covering that later in this class. Yes, but yes. Thus, inclusion is an expansive concept that could apply to silencing certain ideas like conservatism, meritocracy, or support for freedom of speech, usually in the name of safety, and preventing the trauma or violence that such ideas could inflict upon progressives who see them as ideologies that perpetuate systemic harm. So we saw the video of the street preacher getting arrested, and they were talking about the news reporter was talking about this being a conflict between inclusion and free speech, if you remember the opening statement that she had made. And this is what they will argue is that what that preacher was talking about, even though he was just quoting from the Bible, was being perceived as traumatic, and violence is now words, and violence to the people whom were hearing it. So, in all cases, either safety, mostly but not always psychological, that's the trauma that they're talking about, of the people involved in the space, or their right to have a space free from oppression, is cited as the reason for exclusive limitations done in the name of inclusion. On some occasions, to be inclusive of members of marginalized groups, inclusion has been used to justify excluding people considered privileged, like men, straight people, and white people, or to limit their numbers, seat them at the back of a gathering, or ask them to listen silently. This need to exclude certain people in the name of inclusion follows the critical social justice theory insistence that one of the features of systemic power and privilege is that all spaces are spaces in which the dominant group's cultures are welcomed and other cultures are excluded by means of the hegemony of the dominant culture. So what they're basically doing is, if you are part of the dominant culture, the one who are pushing their social hegemony on anybody in normal or how things had been beforehand, you are expected to be taking the metaphorical seat at the back of the bus in lieu of the people who are marginalized. So, to answer your question there, Evelyn, yeah. Thus, segregated black-only spaces, for example, are considered a necessary corrective to whiteness and a form of desegregating those spaces according to the theory of critical social justice. There's been a number of colleges that have been having graduation ceremonies only for people of color or black students alone, or have spaces only for people of color within universities. And thus, if you are a white person going in there and you're asked to leave, you have to leave. And that's been actually challenged a number of times by lawsuits being placed against the colleges. But right now, it really hasn't been pushed back against enough, and there hasn't been enough light shown on that. But yeah, that's something that's growing more. And you'll see that in corporate America, where you'll have, as far back as 2002, I was working for a large corporation, and they had a bunch of these different groups for, say, marginalized people, group for African Americans, for homosexuals, for Asians and Pacific Islanders, you name it, they had different organizations. And you were expected to join one of these groups in some way if you were going to get promoted within that corporation. And if you were there and you were not a member of one of these groups, you were expected to listen respectively and never talk. And then if they asked you to leave, you had to leave no matter what. And then they had their own spaces, their own get-togethers, and you were just not allowed without invitation. So, and that was in 2002.
So do they have right on the water faucets?
You would expect, right? So an inclusive environment, excuse me, I'm tongue-tied today. An inclusive environment cannot, by the social justice definition, tolerate any speech, including symbolic displays of representation, that offends, might offend, or could be construed as being potentially offensive to any member of any marginalized group. If it did, that would be exclusionary to members of that group and would multiply or perpetuate their oppression. Of note, this offense need not be experienced by anyone, but could merely exist in a potential state, thus leaving speech in an inclusive space subject to problematization, or it could be experienced as offense by proxy, in which a member of a dominant group indicates that she is offended on behalf of, or perhaps entirely hypothetical, marginalized person who might at some point enter the inclusive space. And I don't know if that's a long word of, you'll walk in and say, you make a joke about something that could be considered off color, and like say, Rachel over there could get offended for her friend that's not even here, who could possibly be here, even though that joke may have not even had anything even tangentially to do with anything that could have been potentially harmful. But if it could be, not that it is, if it could be perceived to be as offensive or harmful, then that's, and what that basically is, would basically paint Becca as an ally, somebody who's completely taken into the critical social justice theory, and she's turned into an activist.
I have, my cousins love doing that. Just love doing that. Pointing out how this could offend this totally hypothetical person.
Mm-hmm.
What if a blind Black person who experienced childhood trauma at the age of 12 heard about this?
Exactly, and that's a good indicator, a very good indicator. And I don't want to throw Miranda back in, but she's got a very good friend that does this all the time to her. Oh, I'm throwing you under the bus again, love. See if you're paying attention. No, okay. I'm that entertaining. Okay, so because social justice always interprets everything through a lens of systemic power dynamics, this status is unidirectional and thus never applies to members of dominant groups, who can be made to feel as unwelcome or offended as possible, up to and including through explicitly derogatory speech and physically prohibiting their attendance. So inclusion is usually presented in a suite alongside other concepts that is supposed to help. It is supposed to help or enhance. Thus, we offer here of diversity, equity, inclusion, or justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, JEDI, which is, yeah, that's one of the things I'm finding out. I grew up as a huge Star Wars fan, but unfortunately, mostly Star Wars has been completely, the fandom has been completely taken over by this movement. And anytime I hear any Star Wars references, I'm already kind of wincing, knowing that I'm probably going to be running into somebody who's neck deep in theory. So, okay, so these are core programs of social justice activism and application. Most universities, many corporations, many organizations, and some governmental agencies now have offices or officers of diversity and inclusion who are, in effect, administrative critical social justice police. I have the term commissars in there, but I would also want to even extend to calling them priests of this new social justice religion. Anybody familiar with the term commissar or not familiar with that? No? Okay, in every major organization, actually every organization within the Soviet Union, you had to have a political officer, a commissar, who would be basically the representative of the Communist Party within your organization to make sure everybody held to orthodox communist beliefs and practices. And that is currently still the system within China. Every single Chinese corporation has a Communist Party office within it. So there is truly no differentiation between the state and their private industry. And this is basically the same program being manifested in the West these days. So, all because they rebranded it doesn't mean it's not the same. Okay, so inclusion also needs to be understood epistemically to understand how critical social justice uses the term. Epistemically just means theories of knowledge. So the epistemological thought of critical social justice insists that ideas, discourses, ideologies, knowledges, and ways of knowing of dominant groups in society intentionally or implicitly exclude others of these that come from marginalized, minoritized, or oppressed groups. This is considered a fundamental form of oppression that prevents minoritized groups even from being able to speak up on their own behalf unless on biased terms set by those with dominance in society. What that basically all means is that when we talked about these different ways of knowing through intersectionality and standpoint epistemology, is they are being oppressed just by the fact that they are in the dominant society's way of learning about everything, the way of talking about everything, and the way of knowing everything. So I guess I could have probably just worded it that way. It doesn't sound as cool. So as a result, inclusion also requires including knowledges and ways of knowing of minoritized groups, particularly those based on lived experience of oppression. These are to be seen not just as equally valid as knowledge produced, say, by the sciences, but as superior because they are less problematically biased and disruptive, rather than supportive of hegemony, the status quo, and systems of oppression. Of course, this means that the demand for epistemic inclusion generally results in calling knowledge or truth that which it is neither, which will virtually always backfire in the end. So, yeah, they're basically trying to say that their ways of knowing is equal, if not superior to, what we consider ways of knowing logic, science, reason, so on and so forth. So, okay, so here we go. I forgot to tell you I'm changing the chapters again. Sorry about that. So I'm going to do a Christian critique titled DEI Done Wrong. So we're at the end of DEI, which is great. We're 1/3 down the path here. So Latasha Morgan is the founder of Be the Bridge, a Christian organization whose mission is to empower people and culture towards racial healing, equity, and reconciliation. Yet the Whiteness 101 document from their Facebook group instructs whites, don't equate the impact with intent. Your words or behavior have a negative impact on those around you, and that's what matters. Apologize and do better next time. Don't demand proof of the person of color's lived experience or try to counter their narrative with the experience of another person of color. Provide space for a person of colors to wail, cuss, or even yell at you. When a person of color tells you that your words, tone, behavior are racist, oppressive, or triggering, you stop. Don't try to explain yourself.
Is that good advice?
No, but that's exactly what they tell people in DEI training. I'm not kidding. This is something that they will, if you go through a corporate DEI training, and this is a religious organization, mind you, a purportedly Christian organization telling you this. So that if you basically have somebody whose lived experiences or come from a historically marginalized group and they feel like they need to unload on you, yeah. So, and you just promise to do better because you're already guilty under the way this theory works. So we see how a person of color's lived experiences takes priority over objective evidence, reasoned discussion, or even over Scripture's commands about how we are to speak to our brothers and sisters in Christ. And we all know how we are, trying to remember the chapter in Matthew, how we are to address grievances to a brother and sister. As Christians, we have to insist that our compassion must be grounded in truth, that our emotions must be conformed, I don't know why I put reformed, conformed to Scripture, and that our experiences must be recognized as fallible. We dare not allow anyone, whether they're white or black, to place their lived experiences beyond the scrutiny of Scripture, objective evidence, or open dialogue. First, for the Christian, Scripture must be the foundation of all we do and think. Take the very concept of diversity, where people love to appeal to the glorious vision of heaven in Revelation 7. And in heaven we will see a great multitude that no one could number, from every nation, from all tribes, and all peoples and languages. That should shape what we think about ethnic diversity. So we don't have anything about marginalized groups in there whatsoever. We just have people from all over the world. And there's not speak of oppression in that category or that list of the group of people. So, however, let's not forget what comes next, that the great multitude was doing what? Standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes, with palm branches in their hand, and crying out with a loud voice, "Salvation belongs to our God, who sits on the throne, and to the Lamb." In other words, let's not miss what brings this great multitude together, the adoration of God as revealed in Jesus Christ. This is not an encomium to diversity for diversity's sake. Here the goal is worship, and diversity is a byproduct of that worship, rather than the inversion that we see, that they want the diversity first, and then they'll worship the diversity. Which, another hint into our next classes is that I would say Marxism, which these theories are based on, is the worship of man. Not like man singular, which it does in a way do that, but mankind. Yeah, exactly, secular humanism. It is the religion of secular humanism. So how does Scripture shape our views on equity? In numerous places in Scripture, we're commanded to judge impartially and without favoritism. In particular, the Israelites were forbidden from showing partiality either to the rich or to the poor. Yet at the same time, the Mosaic laws made explicit provisions for poverty when it came to sacrificial requirements, such as in Leviticus 12:6-8. The takeaway is that we can't offer a blanket condemnation of unequal treatment. We also have to be exceptionally careful when applying unequal treatment. But also we have to remember that when Mary went to anoint Jesus with the scented oil, with the perfumed oil, and Judas complained about how many poor that oil could feed, and Jesus just simply answered, "The poor will always be with us," which I don't know if the people who follow these theories have ever tracked on to how these theories are when they're practiced, but there's no such thing as not poor in these theories. There's just going to be an equal, more of a, rather than a lifting up of all people up into a utopic vision, it's more going to be lowering of everybody down to more of a lower standard of living. So everybody ends up in poverty. So they're all equal in that matter, but not just economic poverty, be poverty, spiritual poverty, psychological poverty, and so on. So to continue, diversity is generally a good thing because we live in a diverse world. It's good to personally know people who are brothers and sisters in Christ with different ethnic backgrounds, different jobs, different educations, and different socioeconomic statuses. That's a blow to our ethnocentrism, our clannishness, our intellectual snobbery, but all that diversity is a byproduct of the gospel. Do we not believe in the sovereignty and power of God? Has not God elected people from every tribe, nation, and tongue? And has not God given us the mission to reach the world? So even in this class, we have a fair and diverse ethnic, sexual, socioeconomic representation of our community and to a lesser extent of the world. And that's what we see in the church, big C church, the big world church. We don't have just rich white men, as this theory would state, but the church has long since been a very diverse organization. So if equity is our only goal, then what is the limiting principle? If we're allowed to treat some people unequally, then what exactly is disallowed? Kind of a what do you call it, a slippery slope argument there. If equity is our only measure of what is just, then what's to stop someone from implanting clearly unjust policies in the name of equity? We should instead let me get some water here. We should instead focus on procedures, not outcomes, not on individuals, rather than on groups. We should first examine whether a particular procedure limits access to particular individuals. If a particular procedure limits access, then remedy it and see if access is improved, but don't make sweeping policy changes based on nothing more than vague notions of equity. Because if you remember, the whole issue with socialism is they want to deconstruct the whole system. And what we as Christians aren't looking at destruction of the system, we're looking at reformation of the system and also a turning towards Christ. But we're fighting. We can only we have to fight this battle one soul at a time, one person at a time, one disciple at a time. Which, unlike the world would have us believe that we're trying to force Christianity down everybody's throat by legislative means, that would never work. We would just end up with the same thing that the critical theory would ultimately end up with, just a bunch of people who would play along just enough to get by. And that wouldn't be Christianity, but that is theory.
That's been tried before, and it didn't turn out.
Yeah, and even whether you're talking about, like, say, religious laws that are currently, that were used within medieval Europe, even within the Islamic extent, even the Islamic expansion, even though they tended to have as long as you paid a tax, you can still maintain your previous way of believing. But whenever you impose morality on a system rather than have it come up through personal conversion, for lack of a better term, you're always going to have people just playing along just to get by. And that happened in the Soviet Union, and that probably even happened. Then that happened in medieval France up until people no longer wanted to play along anymore. So yeah.
You can legislate moral behavior, but you cannot legislate morality, because morality is an issue.
Yeah, I would say I would expand that to say, yeah, you're absolutely right. All legislation is of a moral basis, but I would say you can't legislate moral beliefs. Like, you can't believe in X, Y, or Z, because beliefs are intrinsically subjective, and you can't force somebody to believe anything. But yeah, all laws are basically legislating moral behavior of some sort or another. Yeah, so you're absolutely correct on that. But yeah, the idea that we legislate beliefs is, we are now seeing this within the spread of these new theories, especially within DEI, and now through SEL, which we're going to get to shortly. So, to get back on track, we should recognize that institutional cultures can marginalize certain groups. Paul shows us the response in 1 Corinthians 8. Our response to that is love. Lay down our preferences to build each other up. And that principle actually goes in both directions. People in majority cultures need to be asking, how can we sacrifice our preferences to make others feel welcome? But people in the minority culture need to remind themselves that they should be willing to forgo their preferences as well as for the sake of their brothers and sisters. We're called to deny ourselves and to love sacrificially. And that's a universal. It's not like the idea that one group is to sacrifice in an unbalanced way over others. Sorry, I could have said that better, but That's the best I can come up with at the moment. So, all right, I'm going to jump a little bit forward because I think I want to get us into ESG really quick. Okay, we're going to be going to slide 46. Okay,
No, what?
46. Okay. Yeah, I think I was getting repetitive, as it were. So when I get repetitive, I'm just going to go and skip forward if you all don't mind. So ESG, I've got this titled as the missiology of theory. So missiology and seminary is the study of doing world missions, or any missions in general, but the way I'm arguing that this is going to be the way that this theory is going to be spread across the world. So, defining terms using their usage is going to be nowadays business, ESG is going to be defined as nowadays business leaders no longer consider the improvement of stakeholder value as an option. For all the reasons expanded in other parts of this book, they know that there is no alternative way forward. That is the reason why in the coming years, measuring ESG performance will be the gold standard of business adherence to stakeholder value. Many businesses do not have an interest in making the world better, and some will be tempted to engage in green or woke washing, but they'll be forced to commit ESG, and ultimately, all the commitments will be put to the test by government action and societal pressure. And that's from Klaus Schwab and Thierry Mallory in The Great Narrative for a Better Future, The Great Reset, Book 2. So I've got these underlined stakeholder value there. This is through the activist, ESG is basically through activist investments, through large investment firms. And stakeholder value, stakeholder, when you hear their term, is a council of, instead of shareholders anymore, a council of high-level investors, people who are heads of these different groups that we talk about, like BlackRock Harry was talking about earlier, who all have a stake in the way that the world is going to be, as it should be shaped through their investments. And a great argument I've seen where another term that you can use for these groups of stakeholders is a Soviet, which was the term for a council within the old Soviet Union. That's the way they operate, is a council of stakeholders, which they could be also people, heads of nonprofits, heads of corporations, people within these organizations, especially like within DEI initiatives and the sort, that all work together to shape this future that will end up moving these investments. So that's why I wanted to underscore that. And then they'll be forced to commit ESG, meaning that these are going to be coming in, obviously, as we see, by government action and societal pressure, either A, through legislation, that'll be the government action. Societal pressure is going to be coming in through how society is going to be shaped through the narrative that comes in either through media or through their education. So, okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start tearing apart this definition. So ESG is an acronym that stands for environmental, social, and governance, and refers to a scoring metric primarily within investment finance using these three dimensions as the basis of its scoring. Large investment banks use ESG scoring as a form of what they claim is risk assessment for longer-term investments like those in index and mutual funds and other forms of pooled or passive investment portfolios. Investment banks often use them to engage in what is known as impact investing, which is investing in order to create desirable social or economic outcomes, i.e., to make an impact. And that impact is, you're going to find out what it is here shortly. In this regard, they can be thought of as a kind of impact-based credit system, that is a social credit system for investment capital, mostly retirement pension capital that is invested for long periods of time in passive investment portfolios. So what this is an interesting thing is they're basically taking your pensions and investing it to change the world, all without your permission. ESG scoring is intrinsically woven into the foundations of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which are 17 goals to transform our world as part of their Agenda 2030 which puts a target date on which achieving certain benchmarks regarding this transformation. The word transforming in relationship to changing the world to be more environmentally and socially ideal has been the central pillar of the communist thought from the writing of early Marx in the economic and philosophical manuscripts of 1844. So if you read through, and this is something if you want to do on your own, you read through the 17 goals to transform the world as part of the UN's Agenda 2030 and read Marx's economic and philosophical manuscript side by side, you'll see that they are nearly parallel. So, before analyzing E, S, and G on their own terms, it's worth noting how the ESG scoring system works, along with certain points about its history. 3 points stand out. These are that 1, ESG investing is a form of impact investment that doesn't necessarily advertise itself entirely as such. 2, ESG investing is most importantly done through passive investment programs and therefore invests other people's money. And 3, the firms controlling the ESG scoring systems control a sizable percentage of all investment assets in the world and therefore have tremendous, if not cartel, power over the markets. First, then, ESG is unabashedly a form of impact investment that claims to be long-term risk management investment. This mismatch is egregious as there's no clear connections in theory or evidence proving that ESG investment manages long-term investment risk, though the socio-political manipulation is an impact investment is clear. I'm seeing if I might be able to skip ahead on some of these, so I'm going to let you finish reading that one. Okay. I got a little bit too much in the weeds here, so I'm going to skip ahead a little bit further. Okay, let's start off with slide 53. And the ESG program then, because that was just basically going through the mechanics of how they implement it, but less than just skipping forward to what their motives are. The ESG program then arose specifically from within the context of the early 2000 environmental activism movement as it connected to the broader UN sustainability agenda, which, among other things, believes that anthropogenic climate change is a catastrophic and existential risk for all humanity and life on Earth unless several $1 trillion a year are directed specifically to mitigating it through radical environmental policies such as the reduction of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So this isn't to argue against anything that, like, climate change, yes, climate change denial, anything. This is just the mechanisms by which they are pushing forward the agenda and thus are able to start performing these highly costly investments that were taking companies' profit margins and throwing them in the tank just due to the unpopularity of these investment decisions, also shaping government policies across the board, as we see, and especially has been very popularized through what was the Tokyo climate, or I'm trying to remember, I can't remember which one it was, but basically through different treaties. What's that? Something like the Paris Climate Accord. There we go. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, so different multinational treaties that have been signed in order to put all countries on the same green governance tract, the environmental tract. So the environmental and ESG is therefore easily understood. Key expert stakeholders at major outfits like the United Nations, World Economic Forum, and many of the world's largest philanthropic foundations, working with university professors, determine what they consider to be a sound environmental policy for corporations in alignment with this particular environmental activist agenda. Corporations are often scored according to their compliance with that activist agenda. If they don't like it or disagree with it, they find themselves in risk of having their stocks devalued. So we basically have ways of forcing large corporations to force their entire boards to move their whole business model in line with these activist investments. That's all it just states. But this is under the auspices of environmental issues. I want to see if I can skip forward. Okay. The corporate social sorry, I need to slow down with my speech. I'm just so excited to get through all of this that I just want to go through really quick. The corporate social responsibility movement forms the basis for the S, the social justice component of ESG. In other words, the S in ESG stands for social justice, which is little more than the updated branding for communist redistribution under the identity, political, social theories of late neo-Marxism that is, as we know it today, woke Marxism, corporations and institutions that promote, implement, mandate, and sell diversity, equity, and inclusion, or unconscious bias training, and policies or other that support woke social causes will see their ESG scores go up. But the interesting thing is, so you would think that, like being an electric car company, something that's leading towards the environmental good of the world would cause an ESG score to go up, say like in Tesla, right? Except they got theirs knocked down because of Elon Musk's, let's say, increasingly conservative viewpoints. So that's where the S part of his score knocked him down.
Right.
Specifically, his stance on free speech.
Yeah,
What got him in trouble.
exactly.
And also, like, bullying people isn't the way to say talking to people so that they can make their own decisions.
Exactly. Especially pointing out the hypocrisy of their system too is something that.
The problem with that is that a bunch of really rich people up high are really a lot smarter than us, and we're too dumb to realize that we need to take care of these people.
You can't trust farmers.
Right, farmers aren't smart enough to care about.
Yeah, only the stakeholders have that knowledge, that hidden knowledge that us poor plebeians don't have access to. Yeah. I love the snark going on there. I feed off a snark. It's invigorating me. Thank you very much for that. All right, so we're going to skip ahead to slide 58 because I want to get us through the end. Because if you all want to go through the weeds, and then I expanded ESG in the notes immensely, and I'm just trying to get us to where we can finish this up tonight. Okay, so the G in ESG stands for corporate governance, and on its face, it's the least controversial of the three letters. The idea that corporations and institutions that engage in best practices and governance are the lowest long-term risks for investors is obviously true, at least when the best practices are, in fact, genuinely best practices in the domains of that these entities serve. While some best practices do, in fact, raise the G and ESG scores for these entities, there are other criteria as well. For example, having a diverse corporate board, filing requisite ESG paperwork, and hiring political officers in the form of DEI and ESG officers are also necessary to having a high G and ESG score. On this last point, it is difficult to see how this requirement differs significantly from the Soviet demand to place commissars that enforce Soviet policy in various working entities in the Soviet Union. The Soviets, after all, believed in the enthusiastic and fully monitored implementation of their communist ideology was necessary to save humanity from itself too. So I actually worked in a position at a large corporation where I had access to their board, the board of directors notes. I'm not going to tell you what corporation, how I had that access, but I had access to it. And I can tell you that these issues were being discussed with a national, actually international corporation, small I international, but mainly national. They hired on diversity officers in order to maintain their ESG rating. This was back in 2014, 2015 timeframe, so it's been some time. So I've seen it. It's not just something we're hearing that, like, from Tucker Carlson or other, what's his name, Alex Jones or something. This is actually something that's being discussed in the real world. I'm going to probably skip forward because I want to get us. Okay, we'll read slide 60 because this is a summary thing. So in summary, ESG scoring is a tool to enforce a narrow conception of impact investment through leveraging the ocean of investment capital assets contained in the world's pension funds under the guise of being a smart risk management metric for long-term investing. Crucially, the entire scam is being conducted by risking most of the world's population's retirement assets to try to achieve this narrow and potentially self-serving transformative version. Well, I have transformative in scare quotes there. You see that word, you know you're dealing with critical theories, the idea to be able to transform the world. Remember the whole idea that you start out with your vision of the way the world ought to be, then you start building your case, trying to assemble evidence to prove your case so that the outcome will then back up the original way that you think the world ought to be. So be very wary when you hear that in any kind of business sense, any kind of governmental sense, that they're looking for transformative action and transformative measures. That is critical theory, e.g. cultural Marxism, in play. Okay, oh, good, we skipped pretty forward quickly there, okay. And I got this title is Why Christians Should Prepare for ESG. So Christians must take note that the world and its systems are corrupt and that they are getting worse every day. It is not a doom and gloom viewpoint that believers need to hold on to, because the book of Revelation describes in details how things in the on earth will end. Being knowledgeable and formulating plans for the mounting persecution taking place in the world displays the godly wisdom that Solomon often wrote about in the book of Proverbs. These are too few Christians. There are too few Christians around the world that are aware of what ESG and the WF even are. ESG guidelines have led to multiple Christians and Christian organizations having their bank accounts frozen and shut down by financial giants. Some also fear that the increased usage of these types of ESG guidelines will transform the social structure of the world with the use of the social credit system, and where we see a lot of these actions taking place within the Christian organizations having their bank accounts frozen. A lot of that had to do with pushback against the COVID lockdowns. Especially, you'll see within Canada, some organizations were backing up the truckers protest in was it Ottawa or Toronto? Yeah, Ottawa. Yeah. Say because the capital is Ottawa, but yeah. So if you were found to be donating money to the trucker organizations, your assets were frozen by the government. And being that a lot of these ESG guidelines tend to follow along with what has gone on with the Agenda 2030, the UN's Agenda 2030 looks highly upon China's highly what's the word I'm looking for here? Just the way that they're able to manage everything, the technocratic methods that they use to manage their society, whether it be their economy or just the huge population they have, which is that social credit system. That's how they're able, instead of having to have increasingly dystopian and restrictive laws, like active laws, they become increasingly dystopian passive laws. Instead of having cops constantly stop and frisk people, say it's probably not a good example. Instead, all you have to do is monitor their behavior and rank, which everything now is online. They've gone cashless in China. So in that way, you can sociologically manage from a desk rather than having to be out on the street. So you don't have to have the KGB listening in on, or peeping through every peephole. You just have to monitor what they're doing online. Okay, so in theory, if someone does not follow these guidelines, they can suffer repercussions such as having the energy to their home shut off or their bank accounts frozen. To avoid this type of punishment, they must abide by the social standards set in place by the government. Complete control of society by a group of governments, non-government organizations, and unelected bureaucrats have been things of Christian fiction for decades and swiftly are becoming reality. China has already begun to implement this type of system within its borders, referred to as the social credit system, which I alluded to earlier, but also calling back to those videos we watched before class started of pastors being arrested, preachers being arrested on the street. So we're starting to see a very large push against what would have been a tolerant view towards religion and a very intolerant view towards what the world views as Christians' exclusivism or our morality, our objective morality as as dictated by God, as decreed by God, but now that's viewed as something hateful in the world. And now we're going to start increasingly seeing calls that Christianity in and of itself is hateful. And many countries now have hate speech and hate action laws or hate crime laws in place, and those are going to be increasingly used to leverage against the church. So,
A little conspiracy enthusiast side note here. Said something about cutting your power off.
mm-hmm.
I don't believe it's any coincidence that they are attacking gas stoves and gas heaters and pushing electric cars. If they cut your electricity off, they cut you off.
Exactly.
You can't go anywhere. You can't heat your home. You can't cook your food.
Yeah, nowadays we've basically got what's called the Internet of Things taking place, where you have completely automated, internet-connected everything in your house. Your refrigerator will create a shopping list, can even order everything off of Amazon.com to get shipped to you, or even where they actually have people that deliver it, have access to your house and put stuff in your fridge. And your Alexa or other digital assistant devices controlling your house for you. And with that, you've basically put your sanctity of your home into the control of whoever controls these devices. Yeah.
There's
So-
no legitimate cause for them to wage war on natural gas.
No, it's just another method of control, because natural gas is one of the cleanest burning fossil fuels we have, with that being said, like Europe's converted almost all their electrical industry, if not from coal and nuclear over to solar and wind. Everything else that they make up for is in natural gas. Liquefied natural gas is the big thing that got cut off from Russia at the beginning of the Ukraine war. So this is their hugest greenhouse or CO2 emissions that they're displaying. Instead of going after these huge power plants, they're like, oh, we're going to go after the private houses. But it's not about the climate. It's about control in this ESG formula. So is this a conspiracy theory? I think it would have been 10, 20 years ago, but I think we're seeing it in play these days. But that's the hardest thing. As I've always been very skeptical of conspiracy theories in the past, but I'm finding myself more in line with those whom I would have probably viewed as crackpots not but 5 years ago, considering these different measures that are being taken place.
Well, and on that natural gas versus electricity, where does most of the electricity come
Just from natural gas.
Mhm.
from?
And there's about a 50% loss in the delivery of that electricity. The most efficient place to use that, any form of energy, is at the final spot,
Mm-hmm.
not to produce it 3 counties away and send it over wires to you.
Yeah, an interesting thing. There's a recent breakthrough about room temperature superconductors just recently. Hasn't hit the news at all. That basically destroys all that voltage loss across distance for electricity transmission, to where you can have like one nuclear plant or a series of nuclear plants in safe areas transmit power across the country safely. And you don't see that on the news. Eventually, I found that kind of ironic. This is something that could completely, so what I'm looking for, innovate the power grid. Yeah. Notice I didn't want to use that word. Yeah. That's the toughest thing with.
Transform is different from transformative.
Yeah.
You'll understand.
I found myself passively changing my whole lexicon, all the words I speak, trying to root out because I grew up in a very secular upbringing, family, school, everything else, to try to root these discourses out of my system, so I don't even think about it anymore. Sometimes I find myself self-censoring, and I don't know why am I even doing that? Am I trying to reform myself, or am I finding myself like? So I don't want to get down that little rabbit trail, but nonetheless, back on track. So if we studied in previous classes, these initiatives we're on slide 65 are grounded in theory, which is by nature antithetical to the gospel, which it views as a rival. We are witnessing what has to be the most trying period for the church. Even at the height of the Roman persecutions, there were other places for Christians to escape and preserve the gospel. ESG is global, and as such, will require novel measures for Christianity to resist the influence of a growing pressure to alter its fundamental beliefs and practices. And that's what we'll probably see. I have a number of scriptures here. I do want to read one before we cut out, but I had a class, even in my liberal Christian college, when I was getting my theology degree, where we had a Christian lawyer from a Christian legal organization warn us that within probably the next 5 to 10 years, we could probably see the removal of the tax exemption statuses of churches and the removal of pastors' housing allowances, which is the way pastors are able to be provided a livable income that doesn't end up getting them taxed at a super high level. But we're basically going to start seeing a lot of these different measures that have been there for the church slowly stripped away to be able to, because if you take away the tax exemption status of this church, then we see the amount of if our tithes and offerings aren't able to cover that distance, how quickly would this church then be? What? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, would the property be auctioned off due to being? Yeah. Well, that's actually turning out to be fairly normal these days. Churches that have full-time paid staff are becoming far more rare these days. It's typically bivocational is the way that most pastors end up having to go these days. So I wanted to leave a word of scripture, even though I've probably got another 3 more lines of scripture here before we move on to the next subject. If you were of the world would love you as its own. But because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world. Therefore the world hates you. Remember the word I said to you. A servant is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will also persecute you. If they keep my word, they will also keep yours. So I'm going to skip ahead to SEL, which I've got titled, social emotional learning, titled The Catechesis of Theory, which catechesis is a fancy word for religious education. Okay, so let's get into the definition of what social emotional learning using their terms. Social and emotional learning, SEL, is an integral part of education and human development. SEL is the process through which all young people and adults acquire and apply the knowledge, skills, and attitudes to develop healthy identities, manage emotions, and achieve personal and collective goals, feel and show empathy for each other, and establish and maintain supportive relationships, and make responsible and caring decisions. SEL advances educational equity. I didn't do underlining here, so sorry about that. And excellence through authentic, that's a word, school, family, community partnerships to establish learning environments and experiences that feature trusting and collaborative relationships, rigorous and meaningful curriculum and instruction, and ongoing evaluation. SEL can help address various forms of inequity and empower young people and adults to co-create thriving schools and contribute to safe, healthy, and just communities. Anybody see funky words in there that you're like, something seems kind of off here? Nope, nobody? Okay, so I'm going to point out, I should have, what? No, don't be scared.
It's okay, you can just tell us.
You're not getting away that easy. What? That's a very good one, yes. So in the terms of SEL, there's the distinction between teacher and student is supposed to be equal. There's not supposed to be a hierarchy. So the student teaches the teacher as much as the teacher teaches the student. But also the word create, and when dealing with theory, doesn't just mean ideas. It means reality as we know it. And what we're looking for here is authentic, because authentic under critical theories means only their theory. Where else was it? Okay, we got help various forms of inequity. So we're talking about DEI right there, or should we say communism. So, and healthy and just communities, that's going to be the idea of moving forward to communism. Okay, so to critique the definition, social emotional learning is a program of instruction for non-academic educational competencies in the social and emotional spheres. In virtually all cases, SEL is billed as a means of educating the whole child rather than just his academic parts. The leading organization for SEL, the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, CASEL, defines 5 areas of social and emotional competencies to be taught through SEL in addition to and within traditional academic achievement education programming. These 5 areas of social and emotional competencies are sometimes called the CASEL 5 and are comprised of self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. Social emotional learning, therefore, exists to identify and teach particular skills within these 5 domains as an integral part of education and human development. Doesn't seem anything wrong with all that stuff, right? But this is where I want to give you the background of this stuff. So Castle bases its curriculum on the work of Paulo Freire, which claims that all education is inherently a political education. So consciously Marxist political education isn't just acceptable, but uniquely necessary and good, given that all the rest reproduce the alleged underlying oppressive conditions of the society, meaning that we need the Marxist education because other educational systems recreate oppression. SEL is expert educators finally getting this crucial component of education right. Maybe it's snarky, of literally centuries not realizing that it's always the center of education. Of course, this hints to us, I hit the button on accident, hints to us that social emotional learning might actually be a form of Marxist programming posing as an education, which it in fact is. Okay, a little background. Paulo Freire was one of the most influential philosophers of education in the 20th century. He worked wholeheartedly to help people both through his philosophy and his practice of critical pedagogy. Critical pedagogy is the study of education, or especially educating children. And critical pedagogy means you've just applied that study into the critical theories. A native of Brazil, Freire's goal was to eradicate illiteracy among people from previously colonized countries and its continents. His insights were rooted in the social and political realities of the children and grandchildren of former slaves. His ideas, life, and work served to ameliorate the living conditions of oppressed people. And I pulled that out of, I do remember correctly, I think it wasn't Stanford, it was some other encyclopedia of philosophy. So his work, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, is Freire's best known work. He wrote it during his first years of exile from Brazil and published it in 1968. Pedagogy of the Oppressed is divided into 4 chapters, and several important themes are developed throughout the book. Among these themes are how the oppressed and the oppressors are affected by the act of oppression, that liberation is a mutual process, the banking model of education, which he calls what we currently have as our education system, the incompleteness of human beings, generative themes, I should have underlined that, and the use of cooperation and unity and organization to liberate the oppressed. Those concepts of using education to liberate the oppressed people that they're educating. As we, excuse me. So this is now the critique, continuing the critique on the definition. Social emotional learning is a set of psychological and social work-based interventions posing as values education. SEL's systemic nature means that its principles and intentions are to be woven into all aspects of school and even home and community life. That weaving in would include all academic curricula, using SEL as a lens in the material, clubs, sports, interactions between teachers and students, and beyond within the school environment, and ideally anything connected to it, at least under the systemic SEL guidelines. I'm going to see if we might be able to skip forward at some point here, so if you bear with me. So basically, this isn't just like education taking place within the classroom. This is something that's supposed to be going out. The education is supposed to be moving from the student to the home, to all extracurricular activities, to their church, what their parents, their families, so on and so forth. This isn't just something localized in the classroom. I kind of sound redundant. I just skip forward. Yeah,
We're starting this with the credit system.
I'm sorry?
So we're starting this with the credit system.
In a way, but it's... Did anybody look at the email I sent y'all? Does anybody know how the Soviet educational system worked with the young pioneers, the young Octoberists?
No, what?
The Soviet educational system worked with the young pioneers. Okay. Now, I told you that artwork means something that we're going to be teaching in class, but it's basically mirroring the Soviet educational system where the school ends up becoming the actual dominant part of the student's world, and everything else becomes secondary, including their family. So the ideas of like where you had kids informing on their parents, that was set through their educational systems. So. Okay, slide 77. Importantly then, SEL is composed of psychological and social work-based interventions on children performed by teachers and other non-professionals, such as in psychology and social work, in uncontrolled, non-therapeutic spaces in order to teach them right and wrong answers to socially and emotionally relevant circumstances. So we're not teaching them any, it's supposed to be the idea that you're teaching students how to live in life, how to interact with other people. And you would think, okay, great, the modern schools only teach reading or writing and arithmetic, but not how to be a person or what it's like to be a good person. So the idea is that we come in and we're trying to instill moral values into these kids. Okay, so, or which is what any kind of how a person ought to act amongst other people within society. So that's all going to be moral. So this is something I wanted to pick out a little bit. I probably will skip way ahead on this, is the idea that a lot of people will talk about that the religion, especially Christianity within the U.S., started declining when we pulled prayer out of school, right? And the idea that we had, because the idea we had a separation of church and state, right? But I would say mankind is inherently religious. So we've talked about, once again, reiterating the point that Marxism was, I would state it's the religion of secular humanism. So that came in and filled in the vacuum within our schools. And now, instead of being able to communicate moral virtues through, like, say, Christian moral virtues through the teachers that were at the schools, who were most likely would have been Christian in the days, now we're starting to have the moral virtues of the new religion that took the place of Christianity within the school system. That's what I would argue what SEL is. Okay, moving forward, transformative SEL, because there's that word transformative, is wholly neo-Marxist. Its primary agenda is, in fact, to use the 5 competency areas to raise and foster a critical consciousness. Mind you, the word woke means to have a critical consciousness through social and emotional education. This fact is unsurprising to all who understand that transformative is a term employed by all of the dialectical left, most notably including Marxists, to describe their goal of making the world and man into something suitable for communism. Transformative SEL, social awareness, lessons are unabashedly rooted in neo-Marxist social theories like critical race theory, gender theory, queer theory, post-colonial theory, fat studies, and disability studies. And trans SEL, in that regard, and transformative SEL in that regard is a vehicle and coordinating hub for programming, literally, as in thought reform or brainwashing, into the perspectives of these critical theories. Okay, good. I'm where I wanted to be. Okay, I'm sorry. I don't think did we skip ahead, did we? Or did I read too quick? It just seemed like a blur there.
We skipped some.
Okay. So I recommend, if you all want to read these at your time, I just want to be respectful of all your times. I know we got out of hand last week in our conversations, but I want to get us out the door on time tonight. So I'm trying to do, we're getting there. We're at slide 80. So yeah, now we're at unfortunately, the part where SEL has come into Christian schools. So this is where I'm talking about social emotional learning in Christian schools. SEL is widely used in public schools and is now infiltrating private schools, including Christian schools. Castle, okay, when I skipped through that, we've already talked about that. Castle is also a delivery system for CRT. When schools claim they are not teaching CRT, it's because they're using SEL methodologies, which are grounded in theory. This gives them plausible deniability. So you'll hear that, like, students come home, tell their parents about what's being taught at schools. Parents go to complain at school board meetings, and like, oh, we don't teach that in our schools. And I told you it's because they've rebranded it as something else, and this is the rebranding. This is what it's being taught through social emotional learning. Or they may just call something more along the lines of like some sort of new justice theory or empathetic justice. They'll rebrand it in some ways, but it's still the same thing. Okay. So Castle makes an important statement about itself on its webpage. An equity lens. So what is equity again? Anybody? Yep. Is important when developing SEL standards. So an equity lens means a socialist worldview. So I told you, you'll have to learn to be discerning of the terms that they use. They're in everything that we see every day. So that's why I'm going to start quizzing you all every class on these. So really good one. You get a star, Miss Evelyn. Okay, an equity lens is important when developing SEL standards, particularly to ensure that the standards do not unintentionally reinforce implicit power and privilege inequities. Consistent within the pursuit of educational equity, we recently offered the concept of transformative SEL to reflect our interest in making explicit issues such as power, privilege, prejudice, discrimination, social justice, empowerment, and self-determination in the field of SEL with the goal of developing justice-oriented global citizens. Okay, and that last term I should have underlined global citizens because that ties into our previous section. So this is not me. This is not me explicitly trying to drum up some sort of conspiracy theory. This is out of Castle's website. So Castle here states that an equity lens is required to understand and implement SEL. Equity is the core concept of Marxism. It not only means equal outcomes, but it also requires the elimination of everything that has been important historically in our educational system and the Western culture. This includes eliminating equal opportunity as well as student decision-making on their own major and minors. Well, I guess their degree plans, objective grading systems, admissions, and scholarship based on merit, parental involvement in education, patriotism, genuine history, and the importance of mathematics, etc. So basically destroying the entire educational system as we have known it. Christian schools that teach SEL often teach what is called Christian SEL, which is also called biblical SEL. The most common used biblical SEL curriculum is God's Design for Friendship, as it's titled. I don't know, I think I goofed up on my typing there. The curriculum largely relies on Genesis 2:18 to argue that it is biblical. This verse reads, "The Lord said, it is not good for the man to be alone." This is interpreted to be speaking about the need for friendship. The context of the verse clarifies that it's speaking only about the marriage relationship. God meant, God, I don't know if I was beat. I had a convention last week, and I had to scramble and get all this stuff typed out just in one long foul swoop on Monday. I think by the end of Monday night, I'm starting to go, oh. So forgive me if there's typos and grammatical errors. So I'm going to skip forward on that. Okay, this fraudulent interpretation of Genesis 2:18 demonstrates that there is no genuine biblical foundation for SEL. It also clarifies that the curriculum is based on politics, not scholarship, and manipulation, not information. An example of the manipulation that characterizes SEL is that students are commonly given discussion questions that begin with, "How did it feel?" The curriculum recommends questions like this: "How did it feel when you heard your classmates positively describing you?" In this way, students' rational thinking is bypassed and they are directed to their emotions where they're easily manipulated. Okay, and I want to make sure, let me see. Okay, good. I have the scary parts in here too that I want you all to hear about. Let me get a drink really quick. Okay, both the teaching and the exercises that are central to SEL are structured to have students see themselves as part of groups and not as individuals. This is one reason why SEL cannot be restructured to be Christian in nature. When speaking with the woman at the well, Jesus would have related to her as a member of three groups: a woman, a Samaritan, and an adulterer. Could have, should I say. That's if he was into intersectional theory. Jesus, however, spoke to her as an individual, someone who needed the salvation he was bringing her. He looks at us the same way as individuals for whom he lived, died, and rose again. Okay, and this is talking about SEL assessments, and this is the big thing to be scared about with SEL. Through continual data collection, that's one of the biggest, I would say, issues with SEL, is they're basically data mining our students at a young age. So you would think that that wouldn't start until you get plugged into social media or you start having any kind of digital presence in the world, but nowadays it's happening in the schools. So through continual data collection, assessments, and surveys, SEL measures how well each student, each classroom, and each school is meeting the objectives of the radical program described above. Students' answers to these non-academic surveys will be reported as competencies and will become part of the student's permanent record. These assessments violate students' privacy rights, and students should be advised that their answers will follow them for the rest of their lives. And you remember from the very first class when we were talking about the roots of Marxism, especially of some of the critical schools, where modern cultural Marxism was the marriage of Marxism with Freud. So here we have, anytime you have these assessments, these surveys, that's very Freudian in nature, that the idea of sociological and psychological work was done by taking in huge swaths of data by people filling out surveys, and they're typically emotional kind of questions, like rating on a scale of 1 to 10, how do you feel about this issue, or how do you, using these words, how do you feel about so on and so forth. So they're mining students of this stuff, and they're also using it to build a data profile of the students at a very young age to monitor them, and it follows them, unfortunately, the rest of their lives, because once anything's out on the web these days, it's out there for good. See, for example, Castle emphasizes that students will be assessed on empathy, which in the SEL context means the acceptance of LGBTQ activities as well as the support for transgenderism. This, by extension, means support for administering gender-changing hormones and sex change surgeries on minors. I think I skipped a portion where I wanted to say that it just means any kind of adherence to modern critical theories. So, so the RAND Corporation, a firm that designs surveys for measuring SEL outcomes, says its surveys will measure attitudes and beliefs along with emotional stability and the like. Because these surveys are based on the equity standards of SEL, they will measure students' progress on concepts like group consciousness and adoptions of global citizenship, as well on students' beliefs, i.e. religious and moral values. So they're already going to be getting a belief and value system from the students eked out at a very young age. And this is under the guise of education, which is rather interesting. So these surveys are designed to monitor agreement with sustainable development goals we talked about earlier and other major doctrines of cultural Marxism. I'm going to skip forward a little bit. Let you read on that one. Basically, what I wanted to try to state is I'll try to put something in the email following up with this, but try to find a video on, because I think, do you all prefer to read, or do you like having like a YouTube thrown at you? Anybody?
I prefer to read.
Okay, I'll put both in. Okay, give you some background and history on the Soviet education system. See where you can find the parallels here. So I want to try to get us wrapped up because we're already running after time here. So by looking at these we only have 2 slides left. So by looking at these SEL beliefs, it becomes clear, as stated above, that SEL is an educational program designed to indoctrinate students with a cultural Marxist worldview. Cultural Marxism is rooted in atheism and rejects objective morality, which makes it stand at odds with Christian doctrine. That is the main reason why Christian schools should not teach SEL. Marxism is at odds with Christianity. And I ended this with, we should do well to heed the warning of the Apostle Paul, who said, see to it that no one takes you captive through hollow and deceptive philosophy, which depends on human tradition and the elemental spiritual forces of this world rather than on Christ. SEL, with its cultural Marxism, fits this admonition perfectly. And I'm also leaving you a big clue if you look up what elemental spiritual forces mean. So that's the end of this presentation. We managed to squeeze 91 slides into one night. So thank you all for bearing with me. Does anybody have any questions before we wrap up in prayer? Or does everybody just want to get home now? Okay. All right. Miranda, can you go and cut the... All right. Let us pray. Our most gracious